on this day, July 11th, 1 year ago, Cuba saw its largest anti-government protests in decades. Today, we're witnessing the largest exodus from Cuba since the 1980s Mariel boat lift, when 125,000 Cubans left en masse. Over the last 365 days, the regime in Cuba has used intimidation and extended prison sentences to crack down on people rumored to be affiliated with the protest, even those who were just watching on the sidelines. Mothers of kids who watched from the sidelines have also been arrested. At least 700 people, as we speak right now, are behind bars for reasons related to the protest on July 11th last year. Joining us now, Rosa Maria Paya, Cuban activist, founder of Cuba Decide, and Amalia Dache, associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School. Thank you both for being with us. Rosa Maria, 1 year ago today, the entire island took to the streets asking for freedom, for democracy. 1 year later, where are we at?
Well, 1 year later, we know that there is a before and after July 11. We know that that system that the people was shouting for change is still there, but there is a major change in our history, and it's the fact that the Cuban people already changed. And the Cuban regime hasn't been able to contain that will, that determination for freedom, for being able to build a new life, for ending with the dictatorship, for actually bearing communism in Cuba. Of course, the repression has been brutal. Right now, we are talking, and many of the independent journalists, many of the activists in the island are without internet access. It's one of the first things that the Cuban regime just shut down to try to prevent the information to spread. We are talking, and the whole island is militarized at a millimetric level, trying to prevent for that people to take into the streets, and in some way repression and state terrorism works, of course, but that's also a very clear signal of the weakness of the regime.
Amalia, who are the people in Cuba that a year ago took to the streets from east to west asking for freedom? Who are they?
The people of Cuba that took to the streets last year are common people, are people from the most marginalized and poorest neighborhoods of Cuba. These are youth, these are mothers, these are Afro-Cubans, these are women, these are people from the LGBTQ community. And so it is important to acknowledge the identities of these Cubans, right? It's not like these are people who were political dissidents that we know a lot about in the last 63 years. Most of the people, of the 10,000 that were on the streets, were people that had never taken to the streets before. And so this is historic. And also what we're finding is that the repression is causing the police to kill Blacks across Cuba, right? And so I think it's hard for us to have this conversation because the first and foremost, most important piece of this protest is an end to the dictatorship. But there is a racial dynamic that is affecting Black youth and Afro-Cuban mothers. And so I think just like the global conversation that we're having about racial justice, we should also be having this conversation alongside political justice in Cuba.
And Amalia, I mean, since October 1st, the Coast Guard says that it has stopped more than 3 times the number of Cubans fleeing that it did the year before. What is daily life like in Cuba? And there has been a dictatorship for 63 years. Why are things different now than they were in 1960 or 1970 or 1980?
Well, now we have much more pressure on the regime for the activism. And so now Cubans are being repressed at higher rates. We also have electric outages, right? They're actually not allowing electricity to many homes. They're pulling the internet, like Rosa Maria mentioned, to independent news. And you have the economic conditions. You have starvation across the island too that's affecting Cubans, post the COVID pandemic, which we're not really post, but these are all factors that have impacted Cubans at higher rates because of the dictatorship.
Rosa Maria, why should we care about what's going on 90 miles from the shores of Florida?
I think that the most basic answer to that is human rights. The same human rights that the people of the United States wants for them and fight for are the same human rights that the Cuban people is asking for. The difference is that in Cuba, to go into the streets and demand those rights can cost you your life, can cost you your freedom, can cost you the safety of your family. In a moment in which the Cuban situation, the cost of life for the Cuban people have risen in at least 10 times. The inflation numbers in Cuba is 1,000%. That means that many families cannot send their kids to the school every day because they have no food to give them. That means that there are not medicines in the pharmacy or in the hospital, and people die, just as many of them died during the COVID outbreak. But the Cuban regime is also a threat to peace, stability, and democracy in the rest of the region. We have seen how this cancer spread through Venezuela, Nicaragua, probably Bolivia, other movements in the region. We have seen how the Cuban regime, together with the Nicaraguan regime, has orchestrated the major migratory crisis in 40 years. And that's, of course, also a blackmail to this, to the government of the United States and a threat to the national security of this country.
Amalia, when you say it's not only an issue of human rights, but also of racial justice, put that into perspective for us.
Well, the issue when it comes to the dictatorship is that it's used Black Cubans as something like using the savior complex, right? And so because there's these arguments that the Cuban regime, the communist regime, aligned with issues of civil rights during the 60s and supported the anti-apartheid movement, that somehow this regime was automatically aligned with racial justice. But the obvious and evidence that we have from the ground and from history is that actually Black Cubans were used as a scapegoat. And the justice that Black Cubans were asking for before 1959 was something that was absolutely banned through banning Black societies in Cuba. But I don't want to get off of this important time today without acknowledging the Cuban activists, the activists that are all over Europe, that are all over the United States, in New York, in Switzerland. There's now an activist who is Ariel, who is in a hunger strike right now. I want to acknowledge the political prisoners in Cuba, Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, Michael Osorbo, who are facing 5 to 9 years in prison. The Cuban diaspora and our allies are active, and this is what's keeping the momentum going. The activists along with Cubans on the ground. And I want to acknowledge their fight and their struggle, because that is our struggle here in the United States too, in the diaspora.
Amalia Lache and Rosa Maria Paya, I thank you both for being with us on this anniversary of the largest pro-democracy protests in Cuba in many, many years. I thank you both for being with us this morning.